I think One Nation's been the only consistent political party for the last 20 years.
They're not talking about you. All right, well, let me tell you, One Nation is talking about you.
It's like the media's run away from One Nation. They're too scared to ask us any questions, mainly because we're straight talkers and we've got the answers.
This is like a call to arms. You guys need to start making the real decisions and who you're going to vote for.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the ExCandidates. My name is Stephen Tripp, and as always, I'm joined by Adam Zara and Rebecca Thompson. How you guys going tonight?
Good, Stephen. How you going, mate?
Yeah, all good.
I'm well, thank you.
And tonight we have Andrew Robertson on, who was the United Australia Party candidate in my electorate of Warringah, and even though we were, opposition to each other, we developed a good friendship, and I have a lot of respect for him. He's also a lawyer, and he's studying a master in jurisprudence, which is legal theory. So we thought we'd have him on just to give his opinions on a few different topics. We really want to focus on common law and versus common law versus a Bill of Rights, because that's been a hot topic in Australia all the way back to Federation, and that's something that even goes back for me to year 11 legal studies class. But we're excited to have him on. I think this is going to be a really interesting episode. And how are you going tonight, Andrew?
Doing very well, Steve. Thank you for having me on board, and looking forward to going through any questions or anything that you want to discuss tonight.
You're our first United Australia Party guest.
Dun, dun, dun. No.
Hopefully not the last. We've got a lot in common, far more in common than what separates us. In fact, I think we major really on the majors, and I think on some of the economic stuff we might differ slightly, but I think that most of us that ran for either United Australia Party or One Nation both love Australia. We want to see Australia flourish, and I think both parties have a bright future. I hope they do in any event.
So can you explain to everyone what jurisprudence is?
Jurisprudence is effectively the study of legal theory. It's kind of an archaic way of saying that you theorize about why laws are made, why laws are followed, what kind of what impetuses are there in lawmaking generally. Is it a moral domain? Is it an amoral domain? Is it something that how fundamental is law in society? So you look at really law as it's a theoretical kind of study, and you're looking at why people do certain things. So that's what I study when I do jurisprudence. A lot of the topics are discrete. So you look at things like, what is a Bill of Rights? What is a constitution? You look at the import of, say, freedom of speech in a democracy, and more or less kind of what makes Australia unique in respect of its legal system, and how do we stand out from the rest of the world, and the pros and cons of different legal systems. So you look at legal systems in common law countries like Australia, United Kingdom, the United States, and then you also look at, say, like a communist legal system, or some other form of legal system that's a hybrid or a civil law country. So there's a lot to study, but it's not for everyone. Most lawyers hate jurisprudence. Most find it very dull and dry. But I was attracted to it because I felt that it was probably the branch of study that could most protect freedom of speech in this country. And I felt like I'd like to be an expert in something that was going to have benefits to the population at large.
And Australia is a bit unique because we don't have a Bill of Rights compared to America. Now, their Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments of their constitution. Now, if you go back to Federation, there was the argument between having a Bill of Rights or just sticking to common law, and the overriding argument that was we should stick to common law. Now, I've heard both sides argued. The common law side, I was actually having a conversation during the election with Peter Crawford, who was the New South Wales state member for Balmain back in the 1980s. And I was talking to him about having a Bill of Rights here in Australia. And he said, no, that's a terrible idea because if you have a Bill of Rights, then it's open to interpretation. And he quoted a quote from Robert Menzies when he was Prime Minister, and when he was Prime Minister, he was considered quite an expert on the Constitution. And he said, I don't know the exact quote, but he said, if a Bill of Rights, if Australia had a Bill of Rights, he wouldn't want to be the one interpreting it because it'd be open to interpretation, whereas he favoured common law. But on the flip side of that, I've also heard people argue against common law when you look at the 1967 referendum for the Aboriginals and later Mabo, and how long it took common law to catch up for the freedoms or to preserve for those for the Aboriginal people. So with those two arguments as a pretext, what's your? I know UAP had the policy of a Bill of Rights. Why do you think that is the best option over common law?
Well, I'd say that just quickly, common law is really a system of law. It's not so much something that necessarily enshrines a Bill of Rights. Say what the common law does and has done historically is to recognise certain rights that people have by virtue of being a human. So there's a guy called William Blackstone who wrote the Blackstone commentaries back in the day, and he kind of categorized the types of things that are seemingly inalienable to humans. One being, say, like the right to bodily autonomy, for example, or the right to free passage or certain things. Effectively, what the common law did was recognize things that that kind of encroached upon people's liberty, and they were deemed to be a tort, which is a type of law, something like negligence, like you have the right in some areas to expect service to be of a certain standard, and if something falls south of that, then you have a cause of action against that person for damages. Another one would be like trespass to property, and that doesn't mean just someone jumping over your fence. It can, Steve, if you took or detonue is probably a better claim, but if you stopped me from using some of my personal chattels or something like that, that could be trespass. If you stole my car and I couldn't use it, that would be what's called a tort of detonue. All of these things are causes of action. So is defamation as well. If you slandered me, or libel, it's called overseas, you defamed me, then I would have a right to the preservation of my reputation. So there are certain things that the common law recognised, and that was it used to be enough to protect that. In terms of something like bodily autonomy, for example, would be something that the common law would have recognised historically, that someone that took you and wanted to, say, pin you down and do something to you, that would be false imprisonment, and that would be another thing that the common law recognised. What happened in America was when they were looking at constituting their states and actually having a federal constitution, the question was whether or not they needed this kind of this moral edge to the document that they were ratifying. So the Constitution, same with ours, is largely constitutive. It means that we are giving certain powers to the states we're giving certain powers from the states to the federal government to run a country. But it doesn't really deal with anything that is in the realm of human interaction and human relationships. It's quite, I would say, like an amoral document. It's really about what powers the federal government has, what powers the judiciary have, and the kind of interplay between the heads of government. So what was so good about the Bill of Rights was that it was post-War of Independence. There was a big move, what we would call amongst libertarians today, guys that were inspired by people like John Locke, for example, who wrote an essay concerning human understanding. He wrote his second treatise on government, which was very, very influential on people and informing the minds of people that there were certain inalienable rights that no government ever had the capacity to traverse. And, that would be, say, the right to free speech, or the right to free public assembly, for example, the right to petition the government. And what these were really in the Bill of Rights, in the first 10 amendments, effectively, the right to bear arms is another one. It's very, controversial in some ways. But effectively what it was a way that the government recognised the rights of the citizen, and the citizen had a claim against the government if their rights were ever traversed by the government. So I don't see it at all as a common law versus like a Bill of Rights thing. America are a common law country. They have a Bill of Rights. What we have in Australia is a constitution that we have seen in the last kind of 2.5, 3 years has been one that gives powers, Section 51 being the kind of most important section of the Constitution, giving powers to the federal government to make laws concerning a vast array of different areas. Very few of the provisions in the Constitution actually relate to people and what a person can and can't be compelled to do or not to do. So we don't really have the recognition of the individual's rights in our Constitution, and that's kind of where there might be some kind of argument between what we call like an amoral constitution, which is just like this is a document that gives certain branches of government power, and then a Bill of Rights, which brings kind of the human element into it. And we don't have a wedding of those two things, whereas America does. But we're both common law countries. And then you've got like a third example, somewhere like New Zealand, that has a constitution, and it has what's called a Bill of Rights, but it's largely a legislative act. It doesn't have the same force or the same weight as if it were embedded in their constitution, or at least that's the theory. So a lot of Commonwealth countries have to change their constitutions via a referendum, and it requires a really high percentage of support in the society that they're attempting to actually have a referendum in, that you need a lot of public support to change certain laws in their constitution, whereas typically a non-enshrined Bill of Rights doesn't require that. It's a normal act of parliament that just says, we hypothetically really respect your rights, and these are the things you can't do. But I would say that the New Zealand case is probably showing that those kinds of Bill of Rights are actually not worth the paper they're written on. Whereas in America, depending on the state, by the look of it, it kind of broke down jurisdictionally. Some states were very pro the Bill of Rights and the actual respect of that. And I was talking, as I mentioned before we started, was to a couple in Texas today that, said, hey, none of our rights were impinged by the government. We were allowed to do whatever we wanted, freedom of passage. We didn't have to wear anything. We weren't compelled to do anything against our wishes. Whereas in other states, we know that not to be the case. And the last thing I'd say really quickly is, just to put it all in perspective, a country like the United Kingdom, for example, doesn't have a formal constitution, but it has had acts of parliament that act in a way that kind of, when they're read together, gives you some form of constitution of the state. And a lot of people appeal to the Magna Carta as being the kind of first Bill of Rights and things. And I encourage people to read it rather than just claim it. The Magna Carta does recognise certain rights that, there are individuals other than the sovereign in the nation that can petition the king for certain things, but it's not like a formal statement of rights like the Bill of Rights is in America. And I think that when the UAP were running, short of a constitutional referendum, which I don't think, judging by what we've all seen in the society, most people don't think that there's been an abuse of human rights in Australia. I mean, most people think it's kind of okay. So I think that without the kind of I'd say the society really being on board, you could never get it done via a referendum, getting a Bill of Rights in place. So it would have probably been a legislative act. But depending on how the next 3 years goes, and if truth comes out, that I think probably I can't speak for us all, but the four of us probably do think some truth bombs are going to get dropped on society at large. And if those things turn out to be received by the populace at large, then potentially we'd be calling for a Bill of Rights to be actually brought into our constitutional framework, and not easy for a government to, in the future, just do away with.
So, wow. So, Andrew, I felt like that we were meant to be protected by the Constitution. Like, I thought we could always just fall back on the Constitution. I'm still reading, like, I'm no lawyer, man, so I'm still reading it. So it's like 40. I got a brief from Stephen, and it's like 44 pages, and I've read about 10. So, but it's like, so are you saying that really we have no leg to stand on as citizens?
Well, we do have rights as citizens. Like, we have rights, and historically, the common law has protected a number of those that relate to the human body. Like you can't be imprisoned without a charge. Like, habeas corpus was a big deal in the United States. You couldn't just arrest someone without a charge. But what we've seen, I think, is just an encroachment by the government into our lives in every way, where our body is not our own anymore. Really, our thoughts, our speech certainly aren't our own anymore. And what we're seeing is that the deck is so stacked against citizens now, against their governments, because of the system we have, in my opinion, which is that it is extremely easy for a government to legislate because of the heads of powers that they've got, whether it's a state constitution or a federal constitution in this country. There are enormous powers granted to the legislative body to make laws. And because we live in a democracy that, 51% can, rule the other 49, or not even. I mean, look at what we just had in our federal government. Maybe less than 1 in 3 allegedly voted for the governing party, and they're running like they had 100% of us that wanted to do these things. They ran on zero policies, literally. I mean, as far as I'm aware, there wasn't a single policy that was ventilated, and they've got 18 bills or something ready to go. But what you're going to see is that a lot of these are to take away your freedom. A lot of them relate to, your digital identity, your freedom online, and it's always for your own good and your safety. But it's just like a death of 1,000 cuts for individuals in this country. In the old days, the common law preserved our right to do certain things. But when a government legislates, it's kind of called parliamentary supremacy, that if the people have spoken, right? We all spoke in this election and voted in who we wanted. And now those people govern and they make laws that are so inhumane, so absurd, so contrary to like the common good of Australia, and totally, I mean, against national interests. But they've got the imprimatur to do it because they were voted in by the populace. So the Constitution is not to protect us in terms of protect individual rights. The Constitution effectively tells the government, whether it's the executive arm, the legislative arm, or the judicial arm of the government, what the bounds of their powers are. And they're discovering new ways to exercise that. And it is it's so invasive into our lives. But it's like a tidal wave. It's really hard to stop. But, what you see in Sri Lanka or you see in these nations is that, governments can do this for so long as people are being fed and they're being, watered or whatever you want to call it, like they are, functioning. But, with cost of living and what we're seeing at the moment is people will be starting to look at their governments with a different, a different lens. And I think our government has to be really careful because, I think there's been a complete loss of trust in the media apparatus in this country. I think there's going to be a serious crisis of faith in respect of our universities and potentially healthcare professions. And, I'm worried. I mean, the political system, I think they're hanging by a thread. I mean, not many people voted for this Labor government. It doesn't matter how you look at it. And, they're governing like, he was elected in some kind of landslide. The guy takes off and, I've spoken heaps. So.
No, but that's right. It's just, Sorry, Rebecca.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in. Andrew, I familiarised myself with the Constitution only recently, like when we were going through what we're going through the last 2.5 years. Obviously, reading it, I know there's parts that talk about us, being able to cross borders, interstate at any time without interruption or prevention. I know that there's parts that say we're protected from, experimental, medical experiments, dental experiments, things that we don't consent to. There's also parts that talk about when there's a federal law and a state law that, contradict one another, the federal law supersedes it every time. So obviously we saw over the last 2.5 years that completely went out the window. I'm just curious to know, how is it that this was able to sort of happen? How are they able to sidestep these things that are pretty obvious in the Constitution?
Well, I think it really comes down to the delegation of powers and how pretty much every premier and our prime minister acted in concert. And there was no, it's a shame, for the populace's sake that Queensland weren't saying, why are you shutting our borders? New South Wales and say the Northern Territory effectively destroyed their tourism industry. I mean, why didn't governments go out and fight for their people? And I think that was the problem, is that it was being agitated by individuals that were fighting against, the bureaucracy. They were fighting against, the bureaucratic science and the medical health professionals. And it was so stacked. So when I think judges heard these claims, despite whether the claimant was right constitutionally or not for free passage, for example, between states, it was denied because, again, I think being in a democracy and we have these elected officials, it was a real shame as well that Palaszczuk won, I think, during the COVID period, because you could have taken that as, that it was a real kind of thumbs up to that draconian approach. And she was building a lot of those camps at the time and doing some wild stuff. But sorry, I kind of get off track there. But in reality, everything was done more or less under a single power in each state. And it was under the Public Health Act. Effectively, it was that the minister could make any direction effectively if it would be deemed reasonable. And that word reasonable is a subjective term. And it's like, what's reasonable? And if you have these kind of bedwetting people running around making rules for everyone, it would be reasonable to strap, handcuff someone to your bed and not let them leave. That's reasonable in Brad Hazard's world. However, in most normal worlds where people need to feed a family or they need to do things like go out and exercise and get sunlight, etc., everything that was done was unreasonable. And it was this mismatch of what the hell is reasonable. And unbelievably, the government prevailed, and to the point where quite literally, if you weren't willing to partake in an experiment, you were fired. And that's another just an absolute failure of our legislative drafters in terms of not making that a protected class of person under our effectively workplace discrimination acts. I mean, you know, you can't be fired for, say, religious discrimination or discrimination based on your gender, for example, or your sex, or whatever they want to call it now. But you could be based effectively on your medical status. And if you were deemed to be a threat, even though more or less every peer-reviewed paper in the world confirmed that you were less of a threat than anyone if you had natural immunity, that you would be excluded from the workplace. And I would say this was, I mean, it would be generous to say it was the most grossly incompetent period of Australian bureaucracy. I have a feeling, though, that it was more pernicious than just mere negligence or oversight. I think that there was a systemic push by the government to effectively destroy our middle class. I mean, to stop us from working and printing money like they did, and we're all going to reap what the government have sowed. I mean, I wish there was an opt-out function for inflation, you know, or there was an opt-out, like you didn't let me go and shop because I wouldn't comply with certain things. I wish that I didn't have to now pay the tax of inflation that I'm being subject to. And that's the saddest thing for me, is that this is only the beginning. And I think that a lot of people think that, you know, that inflation's done and we're just kind of back to business as usual now. You know, it'll either be stag or hyperinflation. It's one or the other. I think it could be hyperinflation, and our government have sown it, and we're going to reap it in a way that I'm too young to have ever seen it. Apparently, you know, 1970s people that lived through that have experienced this kind of thing before, but it's going to be violent, I suspect, and I'm not looking forward to what's coming.
Andrew, it's very interesting, the interpretation, the word interpretation. So why is it that it actually scares me that rules like what they've done, like through the public health orders, that they utilized, they interpreted it a certain way and then just took over? Is that like I'm sorry, I'm a bit lost for words, because we're all emotional about this particular topic, because all of us in one way or another pretty much ran because of what happened, you know, over the last couple of years, right? Be it for, I know for Stephen, it's, you know, because he wants his daughter to grow up in an Australia that he had or better than. For me, my wife lost her nursing career that she worked very, very hard for, and actually she changed her life and became a nurse, and then now she's told that she can no longer be a nurse. You know, Rebecca as well, you know, she's got her family and she wants her children to, you know, grow up in a better Australia. Me too, with my kids. But so it scares me it scares me that such an important document such as the Constitution and our rights and the people's rights are left open to such vague interpretation. Is that am I right in saying that?
Well, I think the proof's kind of in the pudding, unfortunately. Some words are deliberately ambiguous to allow flexibility for decision makers, because, you know, there are presumably some kinds of health emergencies where extraordinary actions have to be taken, and you can't possibly legislate for I draft wills that have, you know, all kinds of complexities embedded, because you don't know what's going to happen in the future, order of deaths, people dying at different ages overseas, all kinds of things. So you just always want to leave it so it's kind of flexible, that whoever needs to make a decision in the future can do so. So I understand the need for, you know, some ambiguity in terms of, you know, in terms of wording in a document. However, I can't believe that every single chief health officer in the world acted in the same way, that was so contrary to common sense, and every judge seemingly in the common law world, so I call that the Five Eyes, you know, you've got the United States, you've got Canada, United Kingdom, New Zealand, and Australia, how all of them just acted in the same way to turn on the money printer non-stop, shut the middle class down. Everyone, sorry about that. When I say destroy the middle class, I mean all of us were affected. But, you know, in my opinion, there will be a rich and a poor coming out of this whole thing. And if, you know, unless you're getting tips from the federal government in America potentially where you're going to invest your money or what stocks are going to do well, you're going to be in the bottom. You're going to be in the bottom 99.9%. So
it's
I think
very much. Sorry, mate. It's very much a Hunger Games situation. That's what I mean. I felt that. I'm a bit of a movie buff kind of thing, and it felt like a bit of a Hunger Games kind of situation. It feels like it was like if you did a prequel to the first Hunger Games. This is kind of like what happened.
I haven't seen the Hunger Games, but I think I understand the premise. But my understanding is that, it's kind of like there's like a rich class and they make the poor people fight it out. I mean, this is a tale as old as time. Like a human blood sport is kind of, I think, where a really degraded society will go. I think the Romans did it. I know that pretty much every culture in history have done it at some point in time. And I believe that history is very cyclical. And I believe that there are people who have, a lust for power and a lust for money, and they would be willing to do anything in order to attain it and sustain that. And I think what we're going to see, and I really do hope one day that there is justice, and I believe there will be. But I think these people that have made decisions against, good conscience, they should be held to be accountable. I think they should be held accountable in the future. So I don't know if it was Hunger Games per se, but there was definitely an element of, this is how you will live. Like you will stay at home and you will do X and you will do Y. But this other rule set apply to them. I mean, if it was honestly necessary for Gladys Berejiklian to tell us with a media scrum every single day how dangerous it was out there. And for me, it reminded me of that movie. If you want to go into movies, it's I think it's called The Village by M. Night Shyamalan, whatever his name is. Crap movie. Okay. But the premise is that pretty much like they scare these people to stay in the village, and ultimately it's these like geriatrics or geezers that are patrolling the kind of the woods. And like this is meant to be like an international health crisis. And you have some of the biggest gimps on the planet every day getting together, whoa, we're going to talk about how dangerous this is. Too dangerous for you guys. Don't even think about coming outside. We'll handle it. And, I think most people understand that was just the most outrageous hypocrisy. And, I think it's really scarred people, whether they know it yet or not. And I think that, the cognitive dissonance is there at the moment. But I do believe that will fade, and slowly that will become anger towards these people that have effectively stolen your savings. They've stolen your equity in the properties that you guys have worked hard to buy, if you're that lucky. And your purchasing power is gone, and it's all to stay in power, and it's all to increase the wealth of a few at the expense of the masses. So I'm very, very disappointed. And to say that the economic mismanagement that's occurred over the last 3 years has been extreme is an understatement. I mean, to think, though, that every government in the world did this at the expense of their populations, it beggars belief, and we're about to start really seriously paying for that.
And to think that people actually took health advice from Kerry Chant.
Yeah, well. Or Tedros, I mean, it's so ludicrous, quite literally, when you look around the world and see these people. I mean, you'd be forgiven for thinking it was a comedy, like some kind of, Adam Sandler movie where he's playing all the characters and deliberately, making a mockery of us and our intelligence, and just the flipping and flopping between the efficacy of masks. Even that alone, I think, would be enough. When you start looking at that, and it compounds with stuff that genuinely was really hurting people in real life, it's really sad, actually. Like I think, as a lawyer, I probably acted for 40 or 50 families where individuals lost their job. My wife and I, we run a church, and I'd say probably 60% of our families lost at least one breadwinner in their family. That's callous when you have a government that are willing to not let people feed their children legitimately. I figure this: if you're in power and you're willing to let a sizable percentage of your population literally not eat, not qualify for welfare, and you just don't even care, there's not much you wouldn't do. And I suspect this guy called Heinrich Heine, who was a German poet, he said, where books burn, people burn next. And I kind of feel like the trajectory is similar in a government or a country where you're willing to stop people from eating and stop people from working, even from just a purpose point of view. It is so sick and so it's so inhumane. Like, it doesn't feel like the origin of that is human to me. And I think that I think a lot of people are going to be looking very cynically at the whole political system going forward. And, why I said at the start, I hope we have a bright future for both of our parties, is that, I believe that there'll be voters deserting the established parties you guys have been around for a lot longer than we have, but I wouldn't want to be seen in public taking out how to vote for these people, or I wouldn't want to be seen in public, helping them out because of what they have allowed to occur and what they've done to ordinary citizens in this country. I think it's horrific.
Well, sorry, Adam. You talk about people losing their jobs. Like I went through that, and just the mental anguish that comes along with that is not fully recognized. Like some of these people have really been through hell, and their stories are not told. To jump into a hypothetical sort of landscape or view, if the UAP had won the election and brought in a Bill of Rights, how would that have protected against these public health orders?
Well, I think the answer to that question really, it's hard to know in the long run, because really a government is extremely powerful. And I'm not talking about necessarily arming the populace, but against an unarmed population, there is nothing you can do. There is actually no recourse. If your government are unjust, there is no way to make a government act in accordance with their laws. We saw the rankest forms of hypocrisy in the last 2.5 years. So, there's nothing in and of itself in a document that you pass that can actually ensure compliance with the words of a text. And I think the Americans should be more upset than we are in that respect. They literally fought a war to bring the Bill of Rights into existence. And it's literally clearly stated on a piece of paper. You can read it and be like, why is our government trashing this document every day that it exists? In Australia, it would be hard. We wouldn't have that kind of common, we have our Anzac kind of story that this country was forged out of hardship. It wasn't like the people that are rewriting history now. It's like, it was the beach, we rocked up at Bondi on a plane and, there we were, and we just kicked people out of this country. It was like, mate, most people who have, a history in Australia, their families were sent here in the most unbelievable. Read about the First Fleet in particular, read about the Second Fleet in terms of the conditions that these people faced to come here, sent from the other side of the world, a penal colony. People are insane. But anyways, I digress. What I was going to say is this country doesn't have that kind of we've really forged our identity around a Bill of Rights. I think that we'd need a lot more to go wrong in this country in order for us to really rally around it, that it has a central part of our kind of our country's psyche. So I don't know what it would do in the long run, because we wouldn't have that connection with some really, really entrenched document to our hearts and to our minds. But I do think that if the UAP had been elected, that the individuals that were elected would have done everything in their power to uphold the wording of any form of Bill of Rights, whatever the iteration was. We would uphold the words of those texts, because what I was going to say, just on the back of what you were saying before, Steve, is that people don't understand the mental anguish that losing your job caused. But I really think the government underestimated that kind of exposing this many people to, collectively the crucible at the same time has refined, tens of thousands of Australians to the point where the government can't really throw anything else at us. We ran as candidates knowing that we would face hostility, ridicule. And I think honestly, there is a really kind of, I'm not talking it up, but there is a tough individual now that is out there in society that was probably a bit, kind of flabby, so to speak. We were kind of just whatever, just give me my sport and just chill out. I just wanted the government out of my life. I think what I said in my, I think in the early part of my campaign was, that Gladys Berejiklian created me. I was a very happy father of two, running a church with my wife, lawyer in Sydney, university studying, reading, writing books, doing my thing. And the government rocked up in my house, and they're telling me what I can and can't do, and I can't have people over, and I can't do X, I can't do Y, all the while when knowing that this is something that that doesn't warrant this kind of response. So what I would say is, in the long run, if they are electing people from the UAP, or I trust for One Nation as well, that these guys have a backbone, that they're not, what we call a pussy back in the day. They're not going to just cop it. We're going to stand up for what we believe is right. And I actually think, whether they like it or not, or whether people can see it yet, because I think this 3 years of government, I'm actually really thankful I'm not there, because I think this will be unparalleled in Australia for the creation of human misery. I have to be honest. I wouldn't want to be a teal at the ballot box in the next election, because their policies are effectively going to bankrupt this country. And I think people are going to be angry about that. And I don't want to be there. And I think when the truth starts coming out about some of the stuff that we're all well aware of, and we can't really talk about online, there's going to be hell to pay, I suspect. It won't be from people like us. I mean, we didn't comply. We didn't partake in their little game. It'll be people that have lost loved ones and been affected by it. And anyway, so I think to answer the question, yeah, I really do think the UAP people that I know, if they were elected, would have upheld a Bill of Rights and upheld, I think, the Australian Constitution, which is just to actually give us a framework to run a fruitful and industrious country. And, you know, I look forward to the future because I know that one thing I like, lies, you know, they need propaganda, they need censorship to flourish. And, you know, we're waking up to it. And I think a lot of people now are really hungry for the truth. And, you know, our side of this is growing every single day. No one's leaving from our side to go to the other side, you know.
And people need to remember we've got a state election coming up in less than 12 months. So we're looking at like we're going to be a red state as well. So obviously people, I'm not sure if UAPs are running for state under the impression at this point in time they're not. However, One Nation is, and I think you just need to look at the leader of that party being Mark Latham. He's not afraid to say what he feels and what is right. So I think people have an opportunity to sort of, you know, really reflect on, you know, what we've experienced and what we can do within the next 12 months. And then, as you're saying, 3 years time, you know, show up at the polling booths and give them a piece of your mind.
Yeah, and I really do encourage One Nation, because the UAP can't contest. We don't have a party registered in New South Wales for the purpose of the election. But I think there's this kind of Australian kind of federal centric approach to politics that they underestimate the power of the local council. They underestimate the power of the state election. I mean, these are very, very, very ideologically left institutions. I mean, the Liberal Party have just allowed Matt Keane to be their deputy leader, who I honestly think is probably the most left-wing politician in the country. I shudder when I think about the state of the Liberal Party quite seriously. But, you know, it's so important to know that nearly every one of the decisions that impacted on us negatively in the last 2.5 years was perpetrated at a state level. To vote in a Labor government here, I'm not saying that, you know, they'd be necessarily worse than the Liberal Party, because it was very, very bad. I mean, Dan Andrews probably was worse than Gladys. And Mark Gunner up in Northern Territory, he seems like I don't know if he's on this planet. I mean, there are some, I can't actually believe that out of, you know, 6 states and 2 territories, and I guess Norfolk as well, but I cannot believe that was the group that led us through that. I mean, honestly, like, you couldn't have scripted a class like that if you tried. I mean, that was something. They were in a race to outdo each other, I think, in cruelty and poor decision making. I mean, this people will write about this for the rest of history. I mean, what a period of time.
I think the last thing, anyway, is that I think the people are going to have to realise, and they're going to have to actually really pay attention to what happened in other states, because we were a Liberal-run state, or we are a Liberal-run state. And if you had a look, you're right, in Victoria, they had the most severe lockdowns in the whole world. And I think people are going to have to realise that in the state election, it's very important to who they're going to vote for, because, as a matter of fact, One Nation, as it stands, because we are running, is going to be the last line in the sand to give people any sort of protection. If they liked the way Australia was 5 years ago, One Nation are actually the only kind of party who are standing up for that kind of institution in Australia. So what happens is, we're conservative. We're not saying that you can't be gay. We're not saying that you can't be trans. We're saying leave our kids alone. But what we are saying is that, you know, if you liked the good old Australian way, that this could be potentially the last time for the next 2 years after March next year that you will even have a chance to have somebody in your corner. If once Labor get in and there's no one to balance power in New South Wales, I think I see not good things happening on the horizon.
I don't think anyone is optimistic about a Labor government. It would be one of those elections. Who do you hate less? I think that'll be it. But unfortunately, I think a lot of the talking points will be, you know, federal issues. You know, like inflation, cost of living. I think our foreign policy will be in the news again soon if the Eastern Asian commentators are right and things start heating up there. But yeah, I mean, I really do hope that people in New South Wales understand that I think the future of our state is very important, and the decisions that governments at the state level make really impact every facet of our lives. And I think that Dan Andrews was probably the worst premier in the country, judging purely by human flow of people. I mean, I think my understanding is they lost about 60,000 individuals, adults moving out of the state. I mean, that is so catastrophic to your economy, and think about your housing prices. I mean, if there aren't those people bidding in the future, I mean, he probably has wiped off, I would say, tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars from the asset values in Victoria, because you need to be impaired cognitively, I think, to want to move to Victoria at this stage. And that's hugely important for people that have interests down there. And, Queensland, I think, were the beneficiaries of kind of the harsh lockdowns in Sydney and in Melbourne. Like, I know that when it came time to get in touch with my members, probably like 10 or 15%, it was not an insignificant amount of the members from Warringah had moved north. They're like, well, I'm out, and I think, the population shift as a result of the insanity that we've seen. I think it's just the start of that. I think this has planted a seed in a lot of people's minds and in their hearts that, maybe city living isn't for me. Like, I work in North Sydney at the moment, and man, the surveillance equipment that I'm seeing being rolled out, I'm kind of like, well, what's next? Like, what is next? I mean, do they just want to put a barcode on me or and I mean, it's making my life very uncomfortable. Not that I have anything to hide. The government are paranoid, and they probably should be, not because of people like me, but a lot of people don't like them, and a lot of people will vote them out. And, I just think it's disgusting what's happening in this country. We're losing our freedom. And there's, we were talking before about, how do you stop this stuff? I mean, how do you stop the installation of security devices for our safety? You know what I mean? It's like, you can't win. You can't win.
Well, funnily enough that you mentioned that, Andrew, because I first time ever have I really paid a lot of attention to home security. So the homes, all the houses around my area, I'm from Campbelltown, so I'm in the Macarthur region. Mm-hmm. Most of the homes now have surveillance cameras around their house. Mm. So I have surveillance cameras around my house as well, because people were trying to steal my cars and stuff. Mm. But I refuse to connect it to the internet. So it's a closed circuit. I have to review footage at home on a hard drive. It's not so no one can access it. Mm. So, but I've noticed now that that they've scared people into believing that cameras work. And now I know up my street, all the houses have cameras on them. If they're connected to the internet, in essence, what's stopping a government agency from tapping into that signal and actually having surveillance in your suburb, not just in city environment? And now it can infiltrate suburbia as well.
Well, I think the worst part about all of our technology today, effectively, is that we're opting in to a system of control. Power is so centralized in a few companies, and they're brainwashing the public to think that privacy is important to them and it's protected. But they'll have a few show trials where they're like, oh, Apple won't give the ID, for a drug dealer's phone and stuff. It's like, if people believe that surveillance is not prevalent or pervasive, then, good luck to them. But I'm with you. Most people are opting into this system, and they're actually the ones that are giving big tech their data. There's no such thing as a free lunch, literally. And someone always pays, and people pay for these free applications. And, the thing that bothers me is that, you can know that you're on a platform that is controlled by a government from another nation that's hostile to our country. And people, the uptake it's uninhibited by that knowledge. I found it very interesting after our election. The Australian Financial Review wrote an article about how Tom Rogers, who was the Australian Electoral Commissioner, combated disinformation online and won. And he boasted about the AEC taking notes from WeChat in China. And, it beggars belief. Honestly, I feel like it's like the bizarro world. Could you actually imagine that during the Cold War, getting back from a diplomatic mission to the Kremlin, boasting that they've secured our elections, the Soviets, this is the biggest breakthrough in election integrity. But where do you start? Where do you start in this country? And I'm very mindful of what I can and can't talk about. But in Australia, we have no capacity to criticise certain agencies in this country, and that's why we don't hear them reported, because every operation is past, present, ongoing, and it's a threat to national security for you to report on that. So we are living in just this little box. We can't talk about what's actually happening to this country, and it's just how people like it. And I'm very hesitant to talk about this generally, but people should be aware about some of the apparatuses that exist in Australia, and overthrowing or voting them out would be very, 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 very difficult if possible at all. And I worry about the future of this country. Very, very serious concerns about it.
Absolutely serious concerns, 100%.
I just wanted to ask Andrew what his thoughts were with the COVID Safe app being dumped. It was in the headlines the last couple of days, saying I think it was only 6 or 7 million people actually downloaded it and used it, and it was 17 COVID cases or something came from the program.
Was it in New South Wales, or was it?
This was a nationwide. This was a federal government incentive, the COVID Safe app, where it was going to ping you and tell you if you'd walk past someone in the supermarket who'd tested positive for COVID.
Well, I think the scary thing is what it indicates, that there are people, even 17 in this country, that are willing, or however many people took up on this thing, that are willing to share that kind of information with their government. It is so fundamentally different to how I view the government. These people want a babysitter. They would probably ask for this stuff in their bedroom, I suspect. Well, I mean, people do. People are very scared, and I think they're being mollycoddled into this kind of, they need Big Daddy to help them. They need the government to hand out stuff. I think if you're potentially in my world, I can't take anything from the government. I don't qualify for anything, and that's a decision because I don't want to be owned by them. And we used to be free people in a free country, and these apps, they surveil you, literally. I mean, they tell you if you're near someone who allegedly has this thing that people keep talking about, and I can't believe it. But I just can't believe how many people have drunk the Kool-Aid and they think that this is an appropriate response. I mean, most people have had it. Some people have had it twice, 3 times. Imagine treating a common cold like this. I mean, you would be admitted to some kind of institution as a hypochondriac, definitionally, and that's what we've gotten to as a society, where that is actually praised as being responsible, and that's praised as a noble thing to do, is to protect your compatriots by isolating and not working for a week or so. I mean, I remember I catch the bus to work, and I would see people back in 2019, 2018, since I worked, they would be sick as a dog, they'd properly have the flu, and they'd be sitting there sneezing and coughing and stuff. And you'd be like, mate, what is wrong with you? You were so unwell. But that was literally the going rate. And I work in a small business, and if you didn't go to work because you had a tickle in your throat, or you were next to someone who had a cold, you'd be fired, quite literally, I think.
Literally fired.
Yeah, for real. If I came in, or if I called the office and said, I was at a party on Sunday night, and there were about 200 people there, and one of the waiters or something like that has a cold, honestly, I reckon for real, they would be like, well, you've shown us your true colours. You're a coward. I don't want you in my business. And I think that the worst part about what we're seeing is that as a society, we're tolerating and supporting the media, unfortunately, to the point where they can ram this stuff down your throat to make you think that you're somehow weird by thinking that kind of behaviour shouldn't be celebrated. And I think that we have to remember that ultimately we are a capitalist country, and that money makes the world kind of go round. And I do think that abstaining from things, that it might be costly and it might come at a cost to you originally, but the more people that abstain from these media outlets that are pushing the fear, and I mean, I know they're getting paid a lot by the government, so it's hard because they kind of backdoor it. They'll take taxpayer money and then inject it in the form of tax cuts and all kinds of crazy incentives for these media agencies. But it's hard because it's like you don't want to also bite the hand that feeds you. I'm sure this podcast will be on some kind of platform that is part of this system. Yeah, so it's hard. Absolutely. But the good thing is, I hope that one thing I'd say really quickly on this is that I've met some incredibly entrepreneurial people as a result of this movement that's happening. And these are not your guys that are kind of your sooks that, don't want to work and, just want a free ride. These guys are entrepreneurial. they're brave, they'll take a risk, and we've been forced together in this kind of group. And there are epochs of invention, there are epochs of greatness, I think, in societies, and I honestly believe that what I mentioned before is happening, that there is this concentration of really amazing people that are going to produce things, because we've kind of all had the kind of the fear knocked out of us in lots of ways, like fear of failure. Like, start a business, you fail, it's exactly where you were when you lost your job because you wouldn't comply with the mandate. It's like you're not, like, it's like you've faced your fear. It doesn't get much worse on the other side. So I kind of think that, a lot of there's going to be incredible innovation from this, and I think an incredible, almost parallel ecosystem will develop where we don't need to rely on this crap anymore, and that we have people wanting the truth, and that is so powerful. People are so hungry for the truth, and they're being lied to from cradle to grave in this country. And I think that there's so many opportunities for us to get messages like this. This might resonate with people. They might, like this content and share it, and might encourage spin-offs, or it might give you guys an enormous platform, an enormous voice into people's living rooms and their homes, and you can really transform lives, give people hope, and actually embolden people to take back some of their freedom, because really we are collective animals. Humans are very, very swayed by what the masses are doing, and I think the more that are emboldened and the more that they see us kind of swarming and moving together, they understand that there's a movement out there, and that these are the guys that I want to kind of hitch my wagon to. So I just encourage you guys to keep going with it all.
Thanks, Andrew. And Andrew, I was just going to say, I picked up on your entrepreneurial point. I have a very awesome volunteer who's helped me with my campaign, and hopefully will help me with my next one. And he was a teacher, and it's for a long time at a very, very prominent school. And when I rang him the other day and I said, "Oh, mate, I'm going to need you for the next campaign if I get selected. If I get selected, it's not nothing official. What can you do?" And he goes, mate, I've been so busy, and all he's been doing, he's been going out to all the local. He's big on this idea, and I'm actually going to get him involved in life as well, the discussion group. But he's been partitioning all the local farmers around my area, because we're a bit rural as well. So it's, especially Rebecca's area down in Hume there. He's gone to local farmers. He's gone to the, piggeries and all this kind of stuff. And he's just trying to create this community, because he believes, and he's from South Africa, so they've seen a lot of attrition, and Australians never see. Funnily enough, most of my support group are South Africans or from other countries, because Australians have never seen attrition like they have seen. They've left their countries to come here, and now they see our country going like that. I've been yelled at by saying medical apartheid. I've had lawyers say, but apartheid's for race and blah blah blah, and I said, well, it's medical apartheid because we're separating, based on a status of this and that. And maybe the word's not quite right, but that's the best thing I could come up with at the time. The entrepreneurial thing is, and that's the Australian spirit, and you don't need to be born here, and you don't need to be of English descent to have entrepreneurial spirit and have Australian guts. So what happens is, he's been out and he's gone, Adam, because he got sacked, he goes, I've been so busy. So, he's been trying to create this community. And I think, actually, funnily enough, just giving Life Discussion Group a bit of plug as well, I think that's going to be a great platform as well for people like-minded, where they've got a community to speak to. And, and it's just, that entrepreneurial thing was really good. I do think that a lot's going to come out of it, out of what we've been through. It's making people actually reach out to each other. They tried to lock us down, and then we've gotten out of it now, and people are reaching out to a lot of people. I speak to more people now than I ever used to speak to before.
Oh, and the breadth of conversation is enormous. It's not just a few, disparate electorates in Sydney that are talking about this. It's a national issue, and there'll be connections forming between the bush, between the city, and I'm seeing people taking an interest in things that were so on the the forgotten and unloved pile. I know that Steve's a guy that's interested in silver, for example, and there's interest in money all of a sudden. Like, when was that going to happen? I mean, libertarian ideals. I think there's been this real this kind of revitalization of people's faith lives as well in Australia. I mean, people are looking at what's really important. I believe that people will be better fathers and mothers now as a result of it. I mean, we've seen the importance of family, community, and people use the word like-minded, but really it's kind of it's almost like a tribal concept in some respects. It's like, these guys, it's like, I know if you're probably like me, you'll go to a barbecue sometimes and or you go to a function and you're talking to these people and you're like, my goodness, we are on like different planets and they think we're nuts, right? But we've all been there at one stage, something woke us up. But, and then you come and meet someone on the other side and you're like, oh, man, like far out. We can talk, like, let's go for broke. And I think there's a lot of people like that are finding really meaningful relations. And I was obsessed with sport, like obsessed with it. And, back in the day, I mean, drinking culture and things like that, all these things that were so fickle and vain. And I do think that there's kind of a maturing of our culture. And I think that we've been kept in adolescence by our government for a really long time. And, I would be shocked if, there was a straw poll done of people in the kind of freedom movement, if, certain things that were probably destructive and time wasting haven't been purged from their lives, like binge watching television, playing video games, hitting the terps the whole time, just, ingesting sport relentlessly. Because once you realize that that's a distraction to stop you from actually achieving whatever your calling is, whatever your purpose is, it's shocking. So I think that it's an incredibly motivated community. You're going to see a lot of interest in and around health and food. And also, like distribution networks. I mean, I think people are considering ethically how they shop for the first time. Like, why would I keep going to a place that if it was up to them, they wouldn't serve me? That's a big contemplation for a lot of people. And, I really am praying and hoping that that there's a real resurgence of, greengrocers in Australia and, distribution networks that, I mean, we should have the freshest crops in the world. And like, it's caused my wife and I to contemplate going organic. And, all of a sudden I'm seeing how organic apples go off, or, that celery doesn't necessarily come, wrapped in cling wrap, and that it gets like, it dies in a different way to what I'm seeing in the supermarket stuff. And, strawberries going off like they used to, like it's kind of like a time machine, eating in a time machine, and this has happened in my lifetime. I'm starting to witness that just the, how seamless it's been, the severing of individuals from land and from production. And, I think a big one as well that we're going to all be looking at probably, whether you've got children. I know that you got little ones, Steve, and Steve's at least got one little one. We've got kids to contemplate, how do we want to educate these little ones in the future? And I mean, do I want to send them to an institution that I know they're getting brainwashed with stuff that is just crazy? And so anyway, look, it's just the start. And I honestly think that this 3-year parliamentary period will be like none in Australian history. I think we'll be ostracised, I suspect, in the international arena, because there'll be changes, I suspect, in our allies' governments before ours. And I think we'll be that kind of, I reckon there'll be people will be to be voting almost in probably 6 months to vote this mob out. And we're going to have to wait for a couple of years where they do some pretty crazy stuff. But, if you're a big commodities guy, or if you like investing, I think there's some incredible opportunities between now and then. And I think it's about just getting your house in order, like really making good decisions for your own family at the moment. I'd say we kind of know what's really going on in terms of the things that are coming for society, and you can prepare based on what you think is true. And, I mentioned one before, Steve and I are looking at money and sound money, and I think we're on the right side of a price ceiling in respect of some of those precious metals. So, I would really be encouraging people to start thinking about money and savings and inflation, and how, you can protect yourselves against these things. And, people would often say that silver is a hedge against inflation. I think it's a hedge against government. I want people to know that there are some incredible platforms out there that can, enliven precious metals as you're holding them, and you can use them, and you can actually spend off the back of them. So really, I hope that as a community that there are some really prudent people out there that are showing some things financially to help people out, because it's going to be a tough couple of years. Our wages are not going to grow in a fashion that's commensurate with inflation. So, make good decisions, work together. And I do think that there'll be an interest, again, a revived interest in history, where we look at communities that formed in a bigger picture place. So like, I'd encourage people to read, say, the history of Quakerism in the United Kingdom. They were persecuted beyond belief because they wouldn't swear an oath to the Queen. and William Penn was sent to America and he started Pennsylvania. And like, who would have thought? Don't think that only exceptional things happened in the past when motivated people who have been persecuted come together. And I'm not saying it was the worst persecution in history. I'll probably get lambasted by some people using the P word in relation to what we've been through. But I mean, quite seriously, like persecuted to the point where we had to change the trajectory of our lives.
All right, so we'll just shift gears a little bit because I know that you're a Christian man. You even have your own little church, which I've been to, and it's really tremendous. But after seeing everything that's even in Warringah here with the Manly Sea Eagles and the Manly Seven, and kind of like the demonization of especially Christianity, do you feel free speaking about your Christianity in public as much as you would have maybe in the past? And I know Christian people are pretty fearless, but do you definitely feel the pressure on you to be able to speak freely about your Christianity?
Look, I don't feel like I'm persecuted insofar as, like I can't speak about these things. I mean, I think it's all about being wise sometimes and about choosing your battles. Like I'm careful about, where I speak and what I speak about. But what the truth is this has been happening for a really long time. And a lot of censorship is actually done by the individual. A lot of it is self-censorship. And, for years, people have been avoiding, religious debates and, talking about religion or politics at parties and things. And that was the going rate. You guys would know the adage, you can't talk about politics or religion. And they're kind of two of the things that matter most to people. And I think that the removal of that from society, I think, has really, it's really stunted the growth of a lot of people, because we are, whether people like it or not, we are spiritual beings. We have, I believe 99% of people believe that when they're young and when they're growing up, and a lot of it can be beaten out of you, and you can trade that for different belief systems. But to pretend that people aren't spiritual is a lie, and to pretend that people aren't political is a lie. And if you can't talk about those things, you often can't relate on some of the stuff that's most important to people. So for me, the Manly situation was just, it wasn't as bad as the treatment of, say, Israel Folau, in that he lost his job for quoting something on a social media platform. And I'll never forget what Peter Beattie, who was the then, I think he was the chairman of NRL, came out and said, we're an inclusive game, and that's why we've decided to exclude Israel Folau. And I just remember the deafening silence of the kind of church at large, and even just society at large. Like I think for me, it just showed a lot of hypocrisy in society and in our media. There are kind of things that you can't address and cultures that you can't address. I know that we've had athletes that have abstained from wearing, alcohol advertisements before, and a similar issue I think happened with the Pride jersey in the women's AFL, and that was lauded as bravery, and I don't know. I just think for me, I want less and less to do with that world, that world with the media and the mainstream, and but I do know that it's harder for people to profess a Christian faith without facing ridicule and scorn. But it's hard because, we live in a world where a lot of political ideals are treated like that. You get banned for sharing an article from Nature journal, like the highest kind of authority, or seemingly the highest authority in the kind of the realm of science, medicine, and physiology. So, I don't know. It's just a symptom of our time. And the problem is that our enemies, ideologically, I'd call them the left. And I think it's a shame we've let socialist or communist fall from our vernacular, but I think that's what they are. I really do think that they are communists, and they want a godless populace, and they want people who are fearing the state without them having to act. And I think that's kind of where self-censorship is so scary, and that, a lot of NRL players believe, I believe, in God, and they believe that, some of them would have thought that having to wear a jersey of some kind might have affected their faith. I don't know. I do think sometimes we have to be careful which battles to pick, and I just think it's all sad. I think there's no winners in that whole thing. Manly, I don't think did well out of it particularly. I don't think that the players necessarily did well, and it looks like their season's going to be over as a result of losing a pretty critical game. And it's a sport, and I think the bigger issue for me is the politicization of sport. For me, it started with Black Lives Matter. That was never about race. That if you went on their What We Believe page, it was about gender ideology and some of the most radical Marxist ideologies being pushed in under the guise of Black Lives Matter. The name was a misnomer for what it stood for, and same with a lot of these isms are fighting for dejected people, and in reality they're just scapegoating this kind of movement and using it for left-wing political purposes. And I think that that's a shame. Sports people suffer. People from certain races, if there has been racism or there is racism, they suffer. And I just think it's a shame that people aren't really aware of the nature of what is driving these things. They have nice slogans, and their marketing directors are brilliant. They're very, very good at making a pernicious ideology look friendly and loving and inclusive. And anyone that doesn't agree with it politically is shamed and silenced, and their lives are destroyed. And that's pretty sad.
Is excluded. Anyone who doesn't agree with them is excluded. And I loved what you said then. We're an inclusive sport, and we have to exclude him for his beliefs. That's contradictory, and it's contradiction. That's it.
But it also it's just very sad, Israel Lau is probably, I would say, our best rugby player, and if you're a rugby fan, I don't reckon there was a period of time where a sport was destroyed more by an administration, and to the point that I don't even know, they're on Stan now, no offense to Stan, but who's watching rugby union in this country? Who's watching? And fans are the ones that are paying for it. I mean, some ideology that I don't understand. I mean, it's sport. It's crazy. And I think that's there are a lot of people that are upset, I think, by the way that these issues are being handled generally. And I think a lot of people see through that these aren't just friendly little clubs that are inclusive and want this stuff. I mean, the other thing I hate is that to stand against this, it makes you a bigot or someone that hates a certain group, and it's terrible.
Just getting back to something as well, it's very important. I know we're not going to be too much longer, but the language that the left use is very deceiving. So, they tend to mislabel things in nice, airy-fairy terms. And then the Black Lives Matter thing that we were talking about, and then when you said that you went onto their page and it was nothing to do with, it was more about, you said gender and fluidity.
I think they got rid of it in the end, but it was effectively, it was talking about how it's pretty much a war on men. If you look at the actual What We Believe page, I took a screenshot of it back at the day. I'd never heard of the term cisgender before, but that's where I learned it, was on their page. I mean, I was very, very, very surprised. But yeah, I'm with you. I mean,
isn't attacking men these days, though. Seriously.
Well, I think that I would say if I was educating all populace and I was responsible for it, which it's a big task for anyone to do, I would encourage my students or pupils to watch a video by the former KGB agent Yuri Bezmenov, and the length that he goes to explain how subversion of a nation works. And I think our enemies are just laughing at us, that we've got our men who are our men. I mean, I was reading an article the other day. It was mainstream. It was on news.com.au, I think. It was talking about how Australia's average testosterone level has halved, or since the 1960s or something like that. And it's not all just being inculcated with nonsense the whole time. I think a lot of it's our diet, and we're being encouraged effectively not to do a lot of things that are actually good for men. But yeah, there is 100% a war on masculinity in this country. There is no doubt. And, normal traits that men exhibit are being demonized and criminalized. And, I went to school in Australia, and I went to an all boys school, and I was studying, Gwen Harwood poetry in year 12. And that was a compulsory subject. And I'm thinking, how's this fair to make boys, 18-year-old boys, study poets like that? And then I'm competing against girls. And I mean, it's not, women and men both are extremely smart. Humans are extremely incredible beings, It's not about who's smart or who's not. But, I feel like the curriculum at school is so obviously stacked for females. It's outrageous. And the fact that, men are just encouraged to go to school and really park what makes them men, I find it shocking, and I find it deliberate. And, I really do hope that there is some kind of semblance of normality that comes back, that men can be men, women can be women, and I think a lot of the victims, unfortunately, of these isms I mentioned before, are the people that are protected, allegedly being sought to protect. And I think one of the sadder things about feminism as a movement is that it really forced so many women to live like men in the way that they have to support themselves. And you look at that same article was talking about a crisis of fertility, and they pretty much demonized being a mother. And it's now on the back burner. We've got pretty much a negative birth rate in this country. You want to see some chickens come home to roost? My goodness, you wait and see what a 1.4 person birth rate does to your country. We're solely reliant on immigration, and most immigrants aren't dumb enough to move here at the moment because our government has pretty much done the world's worst tourism advertisement over the last 2.5 years. And you talk to people on the street, and they don't realize how we're being perceived by the world. They actually still think, like we're the throw a shrimp on the Barbie style Australia, the tough blokes out in the outback and stuff. It's like, no, you're the blokes that are locked in your house, literally dobbing on your neighbours for having people around and wearing masks in a car by yourself. I mean, that's how we're viewed now by the rest of the world. And it's scary, but it's true.
And it's funny because if they ever did come here, they would see all that happen.
Every
day. Every day.
Yeah, I see it every day, and I'm like, wow, this is serious. What's going on in this country? The brainwashing.
I still see double maskers. Seriously, it doesn't work.
No. And the ones that are walking around outside on like a 20-degree day and it's sunny, what are you doing? Breathe the fresh air.
Get some sun on your face. Damn it. Take the mask off.
Now, we're running out of time, but we could probably ask you 100 more questions. So what we might do just quickly is maybe do some word associations just to get through a couple of topics. So what's your opinion of the big man, Clive Palmer?
I like him a lot. I really like him. Clive, I think is I know I have to be really, really brief on this, but I honestly say this. If anyone met him and sat down and got to know him, I almost can guarantee you that they would like him. I think he truly loves Australia, and I think his heart is definitely in the right place. And I had a really good opportunity to spend time with him and to get to know him. And I think that the media, pretty much, I think anyone that's an enemy of the media warrants a bit of a closer look. Some people are like, there are some people that maybe don't, but if they're putting drugs on the market that might save lives, they're doing things to open up the country to help individuals, save houses and address things like inflation, cost of living. And, I think you got to look at the work and the fruit of their life. And, I was very, very, very pleasantly surprised. I didn't know. I joined, I was praying about it. And I felt like it was the right thing to do to join the UAP. No idea why. I was not affiliated with the party, had no love for it or any real opinion for it. But yeah, I have to say that he impressed me greatly. Very intelligent guy. And I think, not as well understood by people as he could be, for sure.
And Adam and Rebecca can jump in as well if they think of someone. What about Katherine Deves?
I really like Katherine. We had a really good time with her. I think she faced. I mean, she went you got to remember that she's just a normal person. She didn't grow up in the firing line and wasn't a staffer as far as I can tell. Had no real kind of understanding of the political game, but she was it's like a movie, like Rookie of the Year or something, where you have a child that is thrust into the Major League Baseball, or like Air Bud, where you have like a golden retriever playing, with adults, it was that kind of thing. I mean, Katherine went from kind of obscurity into probably the fiercest political theatre in the world potentially, and I think she handled herself really well, all things considered. I think she was very sweet, like a lovely lady. I would definitely have a coffee with her and talk to her. I think she was a lovely person.
Yes,
I think
genuine.
Very genuine. And I actually think that I think she did a lot better than people think. And I think that she did a lot better than 33% of the vote in Warringah. I was amazed how well she did, actually. I tell you what, if I was a betting man,
especially in that second week of pre-polling, you could definitely sense a change in the.
Well, I think I mentioned this to you, Steve. If I was a betting man, and I was there for 11 days of pre-polling, I would have bet everything I owned that there was no way that Zali Steggall could win. There's no way. And she won in a landslide, allegedly. So, it's maybe looks can be deceiving. But it was a masterstroke by Morrison to make Zali support men and women's sport, where she kind of forged, her own career and name on the back of being a female in sport. I thought that was a really, intelligent thing for Morrison to do from a political standpoint. I thought it worked. But those election results, they're hard to understand.
I got one for you. Electric cars.
Oh, I think you're an investor in commodities. They are the best thing in history. The usage of cobalt, nickel, lithium. I'm a big silver man. So if there's true price discovery in these, I think you will all do extremely well if you're into those kind of precious metals. In terms of, look, it's like Mrs. Doubtfire. Have you seen the movie Mrs. Doubtfire, Adam?
I've seen it so many years ago.
When I was a kid, I couldn't work out why they couldn't just get him back as Mrs. Doubtfire, when you're a child, you're looking for a housekeeper. He's brilliant at the job. Just do it.
Yeah.
Because you don't realize that it's a man dressing as a woman pretending to be something that they're not. And it would be awesome. And I like what Miranda says at Sally Field. She goes, she's not real. She's not real. And that's the thing. Electric cars would be awesome if they worked, and if they were green, and if they were, environmentally helpful, and if they were cheap.
And practical.
Yeah, well, I mean, they don't really, unfortunately, yet. I mean, I think as well that people have to realize that electric cars aren't new. There's some missing patents in the automobile history.
From 100 years ago.
Oh, man, most cars were electric originally. And then they looked at
and steam driven.
So absolutely. So look, it's not honest, I don't think, to say that this is a new phenomenon, that this is the savior of the climate. I would say that this is obviously a time where I'd say big oil has now invested in certain things, and they're divesting some of their oil interests because other forms of energy are coming online. And I think that, I think they're looking to diversify their profit, and I think they're going to do very well in the short run. But when precious metals and I think a lot of the componentry for these cars are valued fairly, if we go through a commodity super cycle, then I don't think that any of these cars will be being driven by someone on, what would be commensurate today with like a $600,000 or $700,000 salary. I think that's those kinds of people, when hyperinflation kind of kicks in, they'll be the guys that can drive them and feel good about them for a while. But if you're thinking that, people in Nairobi or, somewhere in, say around East Africa are going to be driving an electric car, you got another thing coming, and it's just kicking the can down the road. I mean, you feel good about not polluting allegedly from your car, but you plug it into a power point, it's either coal or gas or some insanely subsidized hybrid version of electricity that somehow gets sunlight into our. Again, I'd love it to be true, but it's just not practical at this point in time.
You don't have to go to Africa. Just come to my street. We don't have gutters. We don't have street lights, and I don't have a garage. So where would you like me to put a charging station?
That's right. And they cost a bomb. I mean, who in their right mind? I mean, it's a lot. I mean, if you remove government subsidies from this industry, it would implode. I don't think Tesla's ever really they've never made money. I mean, they've got one of these ridiculously inflated share prices. And, it's just a dream. They're selling, I think a lot of these chickens will come home to roost at the same time. I think there will be, once people realize that real assets are important and that these kind of other things are what you can do if they work or whatever. If people wanted to invest in these things and they were profitable, people would do it. You don't need government subsidies. So I think government intervention is destroying and distorting value.
And what about one that's going to fire both of us up, Zali Steggall?
What do I think of her? Is that what your question was?
Yeah, well, word association. So
word association.
Wind turbines on the beach, right?
Well, we were there that night, Steve. We saw what we saw. I think it's a stretch to call most of that.
Shenanigans going on behind the scenes as well.
It was wild, wasn't it? I mean, it would be hard to believe that all took place again. And then the timing, it wasn't like we were in a lockdown or something bizarre. But look, I think that I don't know. I don't really know what to say about that. It's a tough one for me to answer.
Being very diplomatic.
I was going to say, you can tell he's a candidate. It was a candidate.
Well, look, I think that. I honestly hope that that all of these people really do want to see a good, strong Australia, and I hope that that people are, if you're claiming to be an environmentalist, to be big on the environment. That would be nice. I'm a huge reptile lover. Like I call myself an amateur, what's called a herpetologist. I love Australian wildlife, love it. And I feel like it was such a weird experience being told that, you love, fossil fuels and environmental degradation when I'm the exact opposite. I want to shoot feral cats and goats and camels and donkeys and, water buffalo. I want to be trapping and foxes, and, cats are a big one. And, I hear all these environmentalists do is talk about energy and really inefficient forms of energy. It's a joke. I mean, I think Australia's facing the extinction of more of our invertebrates than any other, probably every other continent on the planet put together. And the crisis, that is a genuine crisis. People talk, climate crisis. How about just genuine mass extinction crises in Australia? There are so many of them, and some of the most beautiful things that you'll never get back. So for me, I hope I'm wrong, that a lot of these people are more interested in power and lobbying on behalf of donors. I really hope I'm wrong, and I hope that at heart that these guys are people that love Australia and they love the environment. But I'm someone in life that if your actions do not match your words, then there is a big disconnect, and something is usually being done for improper motives. So that's all I could say. It's got nothing against her necessarily, but for me, a lot of these politicians that are independent, I mean, they treat us like we're very dumb. Do you know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah,
what kind of organisations?
The actions don't meet the words like what they say. That's
well,
what
I mean. They're in concert together. They have the same campaign manager. Like, imagine if we could pull that stunt. Like in crimes, for example, there's an aggravating factor, which is having, like, if you're in company when you wound someone, for example, or you do a robbery in company, it's an aggravating factor. No court on the planet would deem that you weren't working in concert together to qualify as an aggravating factor being in company during the commission of a crime. The threshold it's very clear, and we're expected to suspend our reason again to believe these people aren't affiliated with each other. They're not running as a party. And I mean, the left's war on the words that we use is so extreme. The word now independent is the opposite of meaning independent. And as a culture, we need to preserve and protect words. And I'm big in documenting things in paper in real life. Like I actually think that there'll be a whole new hobby of preserving books purely for the sake of maintaining knowledge at a point in time. And one of the saddest things I'm seeing, and it's like the extinction of our animals is worrying, as are the extinction of English words from their proper usage. And I mean, I encourage people to keep old school dictionaries from, the early 20th century. If you can get older ones, they're more of a collector's item typically, but 1970s dictionaries, anything you can get your hand on, because inflation back in the day was defined as, a sustained period of increased prices as a result of money printing. That really was inflation definitionally. A recession was 2 periods or 2 quarters of reducing growth, negative growth effectively. And now, I mean, we just have governments that just run roughshod over our own language. And it's scary. So anyway, that was a long-winded response. So look, as a person, I know a lot of people that know her. I don't know her very well. I'm sure she's a lovely individual.
I'm yet to meet her. I haven't met her yet. I don't know. I haven't seen her. Maybe tomorrow when I'm up in your way.
Come to a town hall. Steve will give her a call and invite her out.
Yeah,
Let's have her on the podcast. Let's have her on the podcast.
Say Zara from MacArthur wants to meet you.
Yes.
All right. So just lastly, what's the future for Andrew Robertson?
Well, that's a good question. I'm kind of a guy that I always like doing. I like being busy. Like I do like doing stuff. So at the moment, got to finish my university degree. What are we doing? Work stuff. Busy at work at the moment. Very busy. And a big focus for me is literally just making sure that that I'm focusing on business. I'm a lawyer by trade, but also you've got to be growing businesses and you've got to be doing things that are profitable and that people want to utilize your services. Like we are a capitalist country, only just. But I like business and I like opportunities. And at the moment, there are some things that I'm finding very interesting. So I like that. I like investment prospects. And we're very busy with our church congregation as well. Doing a lot of it is now like outreach ministry on the Northern Beaches. So we're doing some kind of homeless outreach. But a lot of people that you end up ministering to are not homeless. Like we have Steve and I, our electorate, a lot. I'm not sure this is Australia-wide or Sydney-wide, definitely, but like no disposable income for food because of rent and cost of living and how much they put into their houses, there's not much money left over. And I think with food prices going up, there's going to be this new class of people that are looking for, food opportunities at a discount. So that's a big part of what we're looking at going into that ministry stuff. So that's all kicking off. And I guess there's a few other things I can't talk about, but then I suppose politically, I guess probably the point of your question, I suppose now is, look, I don't know. I really don't know what I have in store. I'm a Christian man, as we mentioned, and I'll pray about it. And I feel like I never wanted to be a politician. I never, ever wanted to run. I couldn't have thought of anything probably worse than being publicly ridiculed by people who will probably never meet you and wouldn't care to meet you, really. I think that's an interesting part of public life. But I was compelled. I felt like it was the right thing to do. And I guess if I'm called, or if I feel like I'm being called to do that again, I'll run. And I would say one thing is that I'm not going to sit by and watch Australia be destroyed, whether I run or whether I'm involved just in think tanks or being, getting, to encourage people to fight for this country, then that's what I'll do. So I can't say too much more at this point in time. We don't know what's going to happen with the state election. But, I'll be praying for people who, are fighting for the truth and that are, brave and courageous individuals to put their best foot forward. And if you guys are running in the state election, I'll be praying for success. And, and I'd like to see some real freedom fighters get elected. I think there's hopefully a new political breed in this country that will take these positions of power and hopefully restore a good name to public service, because there's not many people that are admirable, I don't think, in that field at the moment, and that's a real shame, and it hurts the whole country. So yeah, and we'd love to have a big family. I should say that my wife and I would love to have many children, and realistically, like, my first and foremost job is to be a husband to my wife and a father to my children, and to be able to provide for them and to be their father is such a privilege. So that's my future.
And is there any way people can follow you, social media or anything like that?
I'm not really on social media, I have to say. I do have some like residual accounts from the election. I think I do. I might have a Telegram account, but I don't really post on it, I think. But I do honestly, almost, I like doing these things for posterity's sake. I want our children to be able to know that there is an archive of their parents, saying the truth then. Do you know what I mean? Like, there were people that were voices against some really horrific regimes in history, and that they spoke the truth. And I think that's something that I would like to, leave just for my children's sake, to know that that we didn't just sit there and we didn't just cop it. So I'm not on much, but I'm very happy to be a contributor if you ever want me back in the future, and I'll be a watcher in the future for sure.
Awesome.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for coming on, Andrew. And, for everyone watching, we really rely on you to get the word out about what we're doing here. So if you liked what you saw tonight, please share it where you can. And follow us on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on Gab. We're pretty much everywhere you might want to find a podcast. So I really hope you enjoyed tonight's episode, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks very much, Andrew.
Bye-bye.
Oh, absolute pleasure, guys. Thank you so much for putting this on, and enjoy. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
See you later. Bye-bye.